Hello guys, my name is the Cosmic Goose, or you can just call me Zach, and the reason I am making this video is to give a brief introduction to Magic the Gathering and specifically the Commander format. And I am making this video not only for myself to better understand the game, because I believe that teaching people is the best way to learn it. I also have many friends that they just don't really understand Magic the first time I explained it to them, and I hope that this video can serve to better explain it to them and to improve how they play, improve their deck building, and stuff like that. And for any one of you that might be watching this and you've never heard of me or you're not my friend, I hope this video will be helpful for you as well. And to get things started, what is Magic the Gathering? Magic the Gathering is it's a card game. So it's a board game that's played with cards, just like poker with the traditional 52 deck of poker cards or stuff like that. And the best way I describe people, or my favorite way of describing Magic to people, is by comparing it to Uno. Because think about it like this. Uno and Magic are very similar games in the sense that they both play cards from a deck. You both have a hand of cards, right? They both can be multiplayer formats, either 1v1 or even in a game of 4 players. And everyone knows how to play Magic. Or not Magic, everyone knows how to play Uno in the sense that Uno is one of the most popular games, at least in the Western world. And before I explain the intricacies of Magic, I feel like the best way to start is by really breaking down how do we play Uno. Well, Uno is played as such. Everyone, they get their hand of 7 cards, right? And you all share the same deck of cards, and then it's dictated, the game is started by flipping the top card of the deck over, and people play off of that. And so, for instance, how do you win when you're playing Magic? Or how do you win when you're playing Uno? Well, your goal is to be the first person to reach a hand of 0 cards. So this is done by playing cards that are either the same color to or the same number to the card that is currently being played on top of the pile, right? Maybe I should be drawing a diagram to help explain this to people, but I think most people have played Uno before, so I am comfortable with just keeping this image up because now I can elaborate on what I really mean by playing cards on top of each other, right? To break it down, we each have a turn, and let's say the top card is a yellow 3. Well, I can either play a yellow card, or I can play a 3 that matches the same color, or same number. You can also play a wild card, so a card that can go on top of any color or number. Well, in Uno, it's not that simple, right? I mean, a lot of people play Uno where you can play a card, and if you have the same card in your hand as your opponent who just played it, you can cut in and be like, oh, you just played a yellow 3? Well, here's my yellow 3. And then you can skip other people's turns by doing that, right? So not only that, but then you also have cards that are not numbers, but they still have a color, but they're like this. They're a skip. So instead of playing a number, you can skip the next person's turn, and then it goes to the next opponent, and so on and so forth. And you keep repeating this process until you have no cards in your hand. Well, what happens when you have no cards in what happens when you don't have a card you can play? Depending on the rules, you just draw a card, or you keep drawing until you draw a card that you can play. And this is why, when describing Magic to people, I always use Uno as a comparison, because Magic is very, very similar to this. Both in Uno and Magic, when you can't play any cards, you just draw one card and you pass the turn to the next player, right? And, I mean, think about it like this. Let's say the card on top is a red 5, right? Well, with this given hand, I can play 3 different cards, right? I can play a red 3, a red skip, or an Uno. And they're both all equally valid choices. I mean, depending on the scenario, one card is going to be more optimal than the other. Let's say the next person after me has an Uno, only one card in their hand. Playing the skip could very well win you the game, right? Or at least postpone that opponent from winning the game, right? And so this is why I think Uno is a great comparison to Magic. I just think Magic is more intricate Uno. They're both games with this kind of strategy that, requires you to think in a critical manner. Magic much more so than Uno. And so with this analogy being made, this comparison's made in mind, let's go into the basics of Magic the Gathering. So, what is Magic the Gathering? Like I said before, it's a card game where your main goal is knocking down all of your opponents and being on top. Unlike in Uno there's only one way to win, and that is by having 0 cards in your hand, right? Well, in Magic, there are a few other ways to win. But before we get into any of those methods, we need to discuss something that's important about the game. Like, just how to play it, right? Well, just like in Uno, well, I guess a little differently than Uno, at the beginning of your turn, you always draw 1 card. Always. Always, always, always. I mean, if we restart the game, we'll keep this hand. Okay, so we can click new turn, and we draw a card. So you do that at the start of each turn. Each player, depending on the format of Magic that you play, is going to have a life total. 40 life is the standard for Commander. And if we look at, we'll get into the health later. Firstly, we just need to discuss the different zones that are present in Magic the Gathering. Because when you play a card, like, think about in Uno there's only 2 zones, or I guess technically 3. You have your hand, you have the card in the middle, so that's like everyone's played card pile, right? And it dictates what you as a player can play and what your opponents can play. And then you have your discard. Actually, there would be no discard in Uno. I'm not sure why I said that. You would have the deck, or what we call the library in Magic. With this in mind, what are the kinds of cards we have? Because just like in Uno, we have multiple kinds of cards, right? We have these different colors, and then we have different numbers, but then we have some cards that don't have a number at all, and they have a different function. Well, in Magic, we can split this up into 2 main categories. We have what we call a permanent card, and then a non-permanent card. So, the names are kind of self-explanatory, but essentially a non-permanent card is that when it is played, it stays on this main field. We call this the battlefield. This battlefield is where you're going to build up your cards, your permanent cards. All of your permanent cards that you play will go into the battlefield. The other zones that we want to consider in Magic are your hand. The hand is just the cards that you currently have. In Magic, at least in Commander format, you can only have 7 cards in your hand at a given time. If you have more than 7 cards, you're forced to discard cards into the graveyard. The graveyard, think of that as your discard pile. Whenever you have a card and you have more than 8 cards or more than 7 cards in your hand, you discard into the graveyard. Whenever you cast a non-permanent spell, it will resolve into the graveyard after you're done casting it. So let's say if I were to play this sorcery, and the sorcery is a non-permanent card, after this effect, so it's destroy target creature. A creature destroyed this way can't be regenerated. Once this effect happens, it goes into your graveyard. And then we have a more permanent graveyard. We call it the exile. Exile is, think about exile as in you're never seeing that card again. If a card gets exiled, it's exiled for pretty much the entire game. With this in mind, what kind of permanent cards exist in Magic? The most important permanent card in the entire game is what we call a land card. Now, if we look at this land, what does a land do, right? Well, it's a permanent card that when you tap it, tapping is turning it sideways. We'll get into that more in a second, but whenever you activate it, it adds 1 mana of its color. Now, this is when I've seen a lot of people get confused about this, people who aren't used to playing these kind of games. Well, the best way I can describe it is, this is your ATM. Let's say your ATM has $1 in it. This is $1, right? So it has $1 in it. Well, once you tap it, once you activate it, you generate your $1, and now you have $1 in your hand. So, like in the ATM, like let's assume that we don't have credit cards or anything like that. In your, let's say you can only use cash. Well, you can't use your cash while it's in the ATM. You have to take it out, and then, so this is your ATM, and once you tap it, you're taking out your $1, right? So you're taking out your $1, and then you now have $1 that you can spend. So it's hard to visualize it, but right now we have $1 floating that we can spend it on, and we can cast certain spells with it. Before we get into the spell casting, we need to discuss the other permanent types. The next permanent type that's important to discuss is what we call a creature. A creature card is a card with both a power and a toughness. So in this case, if we look at this guy, he's called the Forgotten Creation. That's his name. And then his creature type is Zombie Horror. We'll get into this later, like what this creature type really means. What's important right now is looking at these two numbers down here. He's a 3, in Magic, we shorthand it to 3/3. What that means is that he has a power of 3, which is this first number, right? And then he has a toughness of 3. So how does this matter, right? Well, if we look at it, remember the life total I mentioned before. Each player, at least in the commander format, has 40 life. Let's say we play our Forgotten Creation, and then we attack with him. So when you attack with a creature, think about it like throwing a rock at someone in real life. Think about it like attacking like an actual person in real life. You commit to an action. So in this case, we dedicate that by we tap it. Tapping is I'll get more into tapping when I discuss the other permanents. But think about tapping as just remember what I said before, it's a way of showing that you spent it, or that you activated something. It's just a way to indicate that it is activated, right? So when he attacks, we enter something called the combat step, and we tap him, and he's going to deal 3 damage to a target opponent. So let's say that you're in a paintball fight, and you're with your 2 friends. We have friend A and friend B, and you're going to aim at friend B with your paintball gun, and you're going to shoot him with it, right? Well, this is kind of like what in Magic that we're doing right now. With Forgotten Creation, we're going to aim it at friend B, we're going to tap him, and we're going to attack him. If friend B has no other creatures on his board, he is going to take 3 damage. But what if he does have other creatures on his board? What if he has another creature, like this guy, the Champion of Wits? Well, if he has the Champion of Wits out, and the Champion of Wits is not tapped, then the Champion of Wits can block it. If we look at the Champion of Wits, the Champion of Wits has a power of 2 and a toughness of 1. That means that when the Forgotten Creation is going to swing into friend B, the Champion of Wits, the friend B can choose the Champion of Wits to block it. He doesn't have to block it, but the Champion of Wits can block it if friend B desires. And when he does, the Champion of Wits is going to take damage equal to the Forgotten Creation's toughness. In this case, he is going to take 3 damage. Well, if we look at his toughness is only 1. 3 is greater than 1, so the Champion of Wits is going to take 3 damage, and the Champion of Wits will die. Once he dies, he will go into the graveyard. Because Typically in Magic, when one creature dies to another, if you might notice, oh well, we dealt excess damage, right? Like you only needed 1 damage to die. Where does that other 2 damage go? Well, in this case, that damage just goes into the Champion of Wits, and the Champion of Wits will die. That 2 damage doesn't go to friend B at all. Well, something that's important to note is that, okay, so the Champion of Wits is blocking it, and the Champion of Wits' power is 2. Because he is blocking the Forgotten Creation, the Champion of Wits will deal 2 damage to the Forgotten Creation. Think about it like this. If we have 2 pet dogs and they're about to play fight, and I have a Beagle and you have a German Shepherd, your German Shepherd is both bigger and stronger than my Beagle, so my Beagle probably will not last very long in that play fight, right? Well, with the Forgotten Creation and the Champion of Wits, it's kind of the same thing. The Champion of Wits is our Beagle, the Forgotten Creation is our German Shepherd. The Champion of Wits will deal 2 damage to the Forgotten Creation, and the Forgotten Creation will be fine. The Forgotten Creation will deal 3 damage to the Champion of Wits, which will then cause the Champion of Wits to die and go into friend B's graveyard. That is the beginning introduction for creatures in combat in Magic the Gathering. If we look at some of the other permanent types, we have 2 other primary permanent types. We have something called an artifact and an enchantment. I'm going to find that's good enchantment. So, what are the differences between these 2 permanent types and a creature? Well, something that I should mention about creatures is that they cannot attack the first turn they are played. They have something called Summoning Sickness. Summoning Sickness basically means that they cannot tap whatsoever on its first turn that it comes out. Artifacts and enchantments are not the same way. Let's discuss artifacts first. Artifacts are different than creatures in the sense that they do not have a power or toughness, so they cannot block a creature. However, artifacts are typically known for having what we call an activated ability. An activated ability, whenever you see this text in a card, a permanent card, you see that little arrow. I believe it's clockwise. That indicates rotating it right. So it's the tap, right? And when you tap this artifact, you're going to activate its ability, and its ability is add 1 mana of any color to your commander's color identity. Well, all that's basically saying is that we're going to add 1 money to our hand, to our wallet, right? So we tap it, now we have an extra money in our hand. That's an artifact in a nutshell. What's an enchantment? Well, an enchantment it's a permanent type. However, so a permanent type, I feel like I need to remind, I just want to declare this. All permanent types stay on the battlefield per each turn. Unless they somehow get destroyed or they die, they will always be on your battlefield. With this in mind, so for instance, if we have Arcane Signet out on the battlefield, which is an artifact, we can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Well, during our next turn, we untap it, and then we can tap it again on that turn, untap it, tap it again on turn 3, and so it stays, unless it gets destroyed. Let's discuss this final enchantment type. These are these 4 permanent types I've discussed so far, the main permanent types in Magic the Gathering. There are a few others, one you can actually see in my hand right now, but these are the main 4 that I would say matter. When you play a game of Magic, these are the 4 that you will see almost every single game. This enchantment, if we look at it, it's called Dreadhorde Invasion. Enchantments almost never have activated abilities. So you almost never are going to tap it in order to activate it. Instead, they have something called a triggered ability. In this case, a triggered ability is just something that occurs at a certain point in the game. In this case, at the beginning of your upkeep, so at the beginning of your turn, you are going to lose a life, and we are going to make a zombie. So tokens, you know what, I should clarify. Tokens are something that you make. Tokens I find are hard to explain because they really are just copies, right? Like you just kind of make it. Think about it. It's very hard to describe. The best way I can describe it is think about making a batch of cookies, right? There's no unique, typically, let's say it's a batch of chocolate chip cookies. There's not going to be a single unique cookie in that batch. It's just, they're all going to be pretty much the same. They're all going to taste the same because they're in the same batch. In this case, with Dread Horde Invasion, at the beginning of our turn, we just make one generic zombie. It's a 1/1. And it can do everything a normal creature can do. It can attack, it can block, it can attack the turn it comes out, but it can attack the turn after. So that's how enchantments are typically described. They just have an ability that will trigger at some point in the game. The next thing we're going to talk about are something we call non-permanent cards. We kind of alluded to it before, but non-permanent cards are cards that, when you play it, once they're done resolving, they go into your graveyard immediately. And the reason I'm currently looking for my library is that I want to find the second pertinent non-permanent card type. So in this case, we have the two main ones are called a sorcery and an instant. They do very similar things. The main difference is that sorcery is you can only cast a sorcery on your turn. You can't cast it on anyone else's turn. And something I should mention is that all these enchantments and all these permanent cards, you can only cast it on your turn. So we have this instant. This instant is different, as in you can cast it on anyone else's turn. Let's say I'll give you the analogy of the Uno hand. Remember I said before, if someone else plays a red 3, even if it's not my turn, I can cut them off and be like, okay, I'm going to play my red 3 right after yours. That would be an instant interaction. That would be like us casting the Swords to Plowshares on friend A's turn, on a creature that they control. Notice how in this card particular, it says exile target creature. Well, that basically, remember how I said before, graveyard is like our discard pile. When creatures die, or when anything gets destroyed, they go into the graveyard. Exile is like a permanent graveyard. Once something reaches the exile, you're never getting it back, right? So, let's say we Swords to Plowshares. So we exile a target creature. We cast an instant that targets this creature. Well, this creature is going to get exiled. And we're pretty much never going to see him again. And so we gain life equals to its power. So we're going to gain 3 life because its power is 3. And then once both of these actions have happened, Swords to Plowshares will go into the graveyard. That is a very general introduction to the card types in Magic the Gathering. Now we're going to go into actually playing a game of Magic, right? So in the beginning of your game, you among the people playing, you decide on how you want to pick the first player. It can be done it's usually done by a random chance of some sort, like rolling a die, doing an online picker. That's usually how it's done. Everyone draws 7 cards at the beginning of their turn. And so you get to keep your cards, or you can put them at the bottom of your library and draw 7 more cards. That is something we call a mulligan. So remember, at the start of your turn, let's say that we get to go first. We get to start our turn, and we get to draw a card. In this case, we're going to look at our hand. In our hand, I shouldn't even start like that. Remember what I said earlier about lands. You can always play 1 land on your turn. As long as you have a land card in your hand, you can play it on your turn. In this case, we're going to play a swamp. This is the equivalent, and I know the analogy I gave before of the banks. This in this case, our swamp is going to be a bank, right? Well, another way to think about it is it's like a job. You know, it's like a side job that you have. So a good way of thinking about it is, okay, so each day your job is going to produce one resource of your choice. For anyone who has played Catan, it's like placing your settlement on I'm trying to remember, like a plains or like a grassy field, and you get one sheep every single time that number is rolled. Another way to think about it is like Monopoly. In a game of Monopoly, let's say you own a property, you own Boardwalk. The moment someone lands on Boardwalk, you get money from it. Except in Magic, our Swampers are Boardwalk, but we can get the money every single turn from it. We just have to tap it, and then we produce one money of its type, one resource of its type. In this case, we need to discuss now something that's common with every single card in the game that's not a land. It's this symbol at the top right. This is what we call our casting cost. Think about it like this. It's like if you want to go into a grocery store of your choosing and you want to buy a Nintendo Switch, you're going to need to have $300 or something like that, right? Well, if you look at this, that's its cost. That's like saying, okay, so Hashitan Scarab's Fist is $300. Except, in our case, Hashitan is actually one white mana and one black mana. The way I can best describe this to people is, okay, so let's say we are making like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. In order to make that sandwich, we need to have one bread, we need to have some peanut butter, and then we need to have our jelly, right? Well, so in order to make that peanut butter and jelly sandwich, we're going to need to have 2 pieces of bread, jelly, and peanut butter. We need 4 resources to cast it, or to make it, right? Well, if we look at Hashitan, he just needs 2 of those resources. It's like me saying, okay, let's make a. I'm trying to think of a good analogy for this one. It's like saying that we're gonna make our sandwich, but we're only gonna have peanut butter. In that case, we only need 2 pieces of bread and 1 jelly or 1 peanut butter, right? With Hashitan, we just need 1 white mana and 1 black mana. If you look at the basic land that we played, it is a swamp. A swamp can generate 1 black mana. If we go to our next turn, we're going to draw a card. And something that's important to note is that at the beginning of your turn, you untap all of your permanents. So let's say we spent our swamp the last turn. We generated that 1 swamp and we used it on something. At the beginning of our next turn, it untaps. We get to use that resource again. Think about it like getting paid every week. Oh, I got paid money last week. I get paid weekly. Now I'm going to make even more money next week. So we untap our swamp, right? It's our second turn. We get to play our another land. In this case, we can play a plains. And if we look at our hand, we can look at this creature that we already looked at before, and we can see that, okay, so he needs 1 white mana, and he needs 1 black mana. Well, we can generate boom, boom. So let's say if we're going to add counters to these to indicate the money-making process, to really help people understand it. So we have a swamp and a plains. They have not made any money yet. However, the moment we tap it and we activate it, boom, boom, we have now generated 1. We generated 2 money. 1 money from this plains and 1 money from this swamp. Another way you can look at it is, so we got our. Again, that analogy is hard, but we'll do that analogy next turn. So we generated 1 money from the plains, 1 money from the swamp. Another way of looking at it is, okay, so I made 1 peso from this plains and 1 USD from this swamp. Let's pretend that in the world there are some products that you needed 2 currency types to produce, or to buy it. We can spend this money on Hashitan. From this point onwards, I'm just going to start calling it mana because it's simpler to explain it to people if we start using the proper terms. So we're going to generate 2 mana, and then we're going to spend that mana to cast our creature, right? And then that's all we can do this turn because our creature can't attack or do anything because he just came out. So at the beginning of our next turn, we draw a card, and then we untap our lands so we can produce more mana. In our case, we can then play another swamp, and then we can, we add our counter to it. Well, in game actions, you don't have these counters to indicate whether your land has produced mana or not, but this is a good way to visualize producing it, because mana floats. We call it mana float, right? When you tap these plains in these swamps, yeah, you produce the mana, right? But you don't have to spend it immediately. We don't have any cards that we can, we can't cast 2 cards this turn, but we don't have to spend all of our mana at once. Let's say I tap all these swamps and plains. I don't have to immediately be like, okay, I don't have anything to tap, but now I'm going to lose all this mana. No, you don't have to spend it immediately. However, what you do have to spend it. So there are phases in Magic, as you can already tell, and what I've alluded to before. In the beginning, we have our untap phase when you untap all of your land. You then have your draw step, where you draw a card. You then have something called your main phase. This is where you can cast your sorceries and permanents. And you can also cast instants during this phase. You then, after this main phase, you go to your combat step. So, in this case, I won't, in this case, I'll just show it to just explain it to you guys. Let's say I tapped all my lands, and now I have all this floating mana. The moment I enter my combat step, this mana will be lost. Let's say I want to swing at friend. Let's say I want to swing at friend A with this guy, with Hashaton. He's only going to take 1 damage, and then, let's say he has no blockers, he's going to take 1 damage, and then we go to the next step, which is called our second main phase. Well, our lands are already tapped, and they don't untap at our second main phase, so we can't do anything. However, let's say that during our initial main phase, I never tapped these lands. We're going to attack with Hashaton during a combat step, and now we can actually spend our swamps, because we never spent them in our first main phase, and we can cast this card. In this case, this is a fancy sorcery. Really, we're just concerned about this portion up on top. We get to destroy target creature or planeswalker. Planeswalker is another permanent type that I have not discussed because it is not as prevalent as the creature and the other permanent types that we have discussed in this video. And so it just simply says destroy target creature or planeswalker. In this case, we could destroy our own creature. Why we wouldn't really, there's not a good reason for us to do that right now, but let's say friend B has a creature and that's why we weren't able to attack with Hashaton. That's why we weren't able to hit him. We can be like, okay, we're going to destroy your creature. We're going to destroy, let's say he has a Rot Hulk, or a better example would be the Lasotep Chancellor in play. We can use never, we can destroy target creature. We can just destroy this creature. Destroy is just a word for kill. So we kill Lasotep Chancellor and it goes into our graveyard. Well, it goes into friend B's graveyard. Let's say for some reason we did want to destroy our own Hashaton. Well, we, okay, so yeah. So we destroy Hashaton, Scarab's Fist. We cast Never, we do destroy target creature. So we're going to destroy Hashaton. Hashaton will then die and go into our graveyard. Once this effect happens, Never will join the graveyard with him. This is the very basis on how to play Magic the Gathering. I can go more in detail, but for now, this is a pretty general process for how the game will progress. Just keep in mind that instants can be cast on anyone else's turn. That's an important part to keep in mind. You can't cast any permanent or any sorcery on another player's turn. You can only cast them, in fact, on your main steps. Instants you can cast on your combat step, your upkeep, and at the end of your turn, we're not going to actually kill our Hashiton here. At the end of your turn, you have something called your end step. End step, the only thing that really happens on end step in a default game is that if we have more than 7 cards in our hand, we will discard a card on end step. So let's say we had 9 cards in our hand, but we want 7. Well, we have to discard 2 of them. You can discard any 2 cards you want. You're not forced to discard one, or like specific cards, unless something says you have to. You just discard cards, and we go down to 7. And then we proceed with our game. We go to the next player's turn, and then after his turn, after friend A's turn, after friend B's turn, after friend C's turn, because Commander typically has 4 players in it, we go back to our turn, and at the beginning of our upkeep, we draw a card. And, oh no, we have more than 7 cards in our hand. But we don't have to discard immediately. We only have to discard at our end step, and that's if we have nothing to play. Like in our case, we can just play Desert of the Glorified, which enters intact. Well, we now have 7 cards at the end of our end step, so we don't have to cast anything else. Or we don't have to discard anything at our end step, now that we have 7 cards at our end step. That is a very brief introduction as to play, or how to play Magic the Gathering. Something I want to go into a little bit more detail in this video, though, are the color archetypes of Magic, because we've briefly discussed how, a plains can produce a white mana, a swamp can produce a black mana, right? There are also other color archetypes such as blue, red, and green. There are 5 color types in this game. They each do something special. It's kind of like in Uno, where in Uno you have all these different card types or all these color types, and you can only do certain things with that color, right? So for instance, we have these 2 blue 2s. Let's say on our turn we play 1 blue 2, and then we can say, okay, I'm also going to play this other blue 2, because that's how it works. If you have a card of the same type in your hand, you can play it immediately after that initial blue 2 is played, right? Or let's say even that, okay, so we play a red 3, and then our opponent can play this red skip. He can only do that because it's matching the color, right? If we go back to this game, it's important to note that for our basic lands, we can only cast. We can tap this plains to produce white. We can tap this swamp to produce black. We can tap this island, or we can tap this island to produce blue. With this in mind, I want to discuss the stereotypical strengths and weaknesses of each color very briefly, because this is going to assist in our topic for how to play Commander, and even how to build a Commander deck. So, I have this is a great research for Magic the Gathering. It's called edhrec, specifically for Commander-based format in Magic the Gathering. If we look at our color combinations, it's important to note that something I should note right now is that now that we're getting into the Commander portion of this video, what separates Commander from a traditional Magic the Gathering format? Well, there's a few things. Thing number 1 is that you can't have any cards with the same name unless it's a basic land in your deck. So, for instance, we can have 2 swamps in our deck, and that's no issue. But if we can't have 2 Hashitons, the Scarab's Fist, in our deck. It's just not allowed. Something else to note is that you can have 100 cards in your deck. You just have a max of 100. Some formats you can have a max of 60. Some formats you can have pretty much unlimited cards. What makes Commander the special format that it is that we have something called our Commander. A Commander is a card that is going to sit in a special zone, just like our graveyard, just like our library, just like the battlefield, except think about it as like an 8th card in your hand. except it's a card that you have in every single game of Magic you will ever play. Your commander has to be a legendary creature. As long as it's a legendary creature, you can keep your commander in there, in the command zone. Something else that is important to mention, though, about commander is that every card in your deck must correspond with one of the colors in your commander's casting cost. So, for instance, we look at Temet, Nakatomon's Will. We have our white, our blue, and our black mana cost requirement. That means that every card in our deck can only cost white, blue, and black. And this kind of goes for producing that mana as well. Let's say that you have a card that says, oh, you can produce white or red. That's not allowed in your commander deck. However, if it's a card that says, oh, you can tap this to produce 1 mana of any color, that is allowed. It's all about color identity. Also, something else I want to mention is that if we look at this card, we can see this gray number, or this gray circle with a 2 in it. We call that a generic mana cost. That color can be paid with any mana. That's like going up to someone and they're saying, oh yeah, I'm selling this video game. Well, what kind of money for it? Well, I don't really care. It just has to be any money. I'll take 2 USD or I'll take 2 pesos. With that being said, what are some of the generalities with the color combination, right? Because now that we've declared that, okay, as long as your commander has all these the color identities, or the color costs in his commander cost, or not commander cost, but as long as he has this in his cost, you can run any color in your deck. So for instance, if we look at the most popular commander in the past 2 years, we have Aetherdrift, Praetor's Voice, who is white, blue, green, and black. You can run any green, white, blue, or black card in your deck, but you can't run red because red is not in her color identity. Let's look at, now that we've discussed this, let's look at the strengths and weaknesses of each color. And this is very, very, very general. I mean, you could break this down so much, but it goes like this. Blue is known for card draw. Well, I don't really like saying that, but it's known for just outright card draw. It's known for having cards that just say, oh, you cast this, you draw a card from it. Not all colors have a card like that. Specifically red and green don't, and even white doesn't as well. White has a lot of loops to get card draw. But with blue, it has that, and then blue is also known for interaction. So remember, interaction, I should mention, is like your instants, your sorceries. For instance, we have a card, like we have Dam, right? Destroy target creature. A creature destroyed this way can't be regenerated. Blue is known for having a specific type of interaction that just returns it back to its owner's hand. It's, man, I'm trying to remember one of the names. For some reason, it's evading me right now, but it just return target permanent card to owner's hand. Man, it's really bothering me that I can't remember the name, but it's all right. Just return target creature to its owner's hand, or return target permanent to its owner's hand. That's what blue is really known for. Blue is also known for one more type of interaction, because that type of interaction, return target permanent to owner's hand, that's not like permanent removal. They can just cast it again once they get the mana for it. They're also known for something called a counterspell. Counterspell is basically saying that, oh, you're trying to cast, let's say you're trying to cast Krenko the Mob Boss. Like, I'm trying to cast Krenko. The blue player can look at me and say, well, I don't really want you to do that. And he can then tell me, no, I'm going to stop you from doing that before he even enters the battlefield. That's the main difference between a counterspell and something like Swords to Plowshares, which, if we look at Swords to Plowshares again, Swords to Plowshares is just exile target creature. You might wonder, oh, so what's the difference between Swords to Plowshares versus Counterspell? I don't think this deck actually has any counterspells in it. but I'm gonna pull it up here. I should probably specify magic. So there are a few differences between these cards, but they ultimately they can both remove a creature. The main difference is that Counterspell will do it before the creature can even enter the battlefield. However, there's a catch. It has to be before the creature even enters the battlefield. Let's say and it's funny because I keep getting Hashatan in my starting hand, but let's say Hashatan just enters the battlefield, and let's say, so a turn passes, and he's just chilling on my battlefield, and let's say the opponent has a counterspell in their hand. On their turn, they draw it from the top when they start their turn. He can't just say, I'm going to counter Hashatan. No, he can't do that because Hashatan is already on the battlefield. So, with this in mind, those are the things that blue is really known for. They're known for lots of card draw. They're known for returning permanents back to the owner's hand, and then they're also known for counter spells. Countering target spells before they even reach the battlefield, before they're even on the battlefield. With this being said, let's go on to our next color. We'll go on to green, because green is very straightforward. Green is not known for its colors, but it's known for what we call ramp. What is ramp, you might wonder? Ramp is... Remember that arcane signet that I had in my hand earlier, and that, we can tap it to produce 1 mana and our color's commander's color identity. Well, remember that at the beginning of each one of your turns, you can only play 1 land. So our first turn, we play a land. Our second turn, we play another land, right? Well, this is kind of a way to bypass that. For sake of simplicity, I'm going to grab a land, a basic land. We're going to play a swamp. And this really should be our turn 2. So we have our swamp, our island, and we have Arcane Signet in our hand. Because Arcane Signet is 2 generic mana, we can just cast it with any mana color. And then we produce our Arcane Signet, which is now, it's like playing a 3rd land, or 2nd land in our turn. It's as simple as that. That's what, we call this a mana rock. It's colloquially known in Commander. More times than not, you will be running lots of mana rocks in your decks, especially if you're not in green. The reason I mention this is that green is known for land ramp. It's known for playing instants and sorceries that let you play multiple lands on your turn. Now, to show an example, we have a card called Nature's Lure. What does Nature's Lure do? It's a sorcery, so you can only cast it during your main phases, and on your turn, you just search your library for a forest. A forest is just a basic land card, like a swamp or an island, and you just put it onto the battlefield. It doesn't matter if you played a forest before it. You can play this forest on top of the forest that you played earlier. So by turn 3, you can have 3 lands in play instead of 2 at the beginning of your turn. So by the end of turn 3, you can have at minimum 4 lands in play. Green is very much known for its land ramp. Green is also known for its big, powerful creatures. What do I mean by that? It's known for having, what's a mono green commander that I can think of? Again, I don't know why it's evading me. The first one that comes to mind is Lumra, Bellow of the Woods. So Lumra, his power and toughness is equal to the number of lands in play. So in that case, if we were to play Luma in this deck, which is impossible because there's no cream in his color identity, but he would be power toughness 2/2. However, let's say we have all these lands in play. He is now a 5/5. And green gets lands out very, very fast. So, for instance, he would be bigger than our commander that is a 4/4. With this in mind, that's kind of what green is known for. It's just known for lots of ramp and big creatures. And then I should also say creature synergies. So green has a lot of spells that are, a lot of enchantments and spells that are like, you can draw a card whenever a creature enters your battlefield. Stuff like that. let's go into white. White is known for its targeted, and not even targeted, it's known for its creature and art and just removal in general. Green is very good at just green. White's very good at removing enchantments. Oh, I should mention, my apologies. Green is also known for its artifact and enchantment removal. That's what it's really good at. But then when it comes to creature removal, green really struggles with that. Green doesn't have a lot of good direct creature removal like white does, in that white has stuff like Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, which are, as we've looked at before, it's just an instant that costs 1 white mana that's exile target creature. So white's known for that. White is also known for... White has good draw and ramp, but it's not impulse. So, you know, when we look at something like Nature's Lore, it's a sorcery that just directly gives us 1 more land, right? Well, white doesn't have many cards that just say, play this sorcery and we go find a land that put on the battlefield. White has a lot of cards where it's like, oh, like an opponent did something. Well, because an opponent did something, we can draw cards from that. Or an opponent did something, let's make a treasure token. For instance, a treasure token, I should say, is just it's like an arcane signet that you can only use once, and then it gets destroyed. Tokens do not go into your graveyard, I should mention. With this in mind, so white's known for those 2 attributes, and then white is also known for its protection. So white is really good at just stopping things from happening. Let's say, oh, I'm going to cast... Man, I'm trying to think of a good example that's not white. Let's say I'm going to cast a black spell called Murder, which is just destroy target creature. White can basically say, well, actually, my creature is going to get an attribute. An attribute, I should call it an attribute or ability. We'll go over those very briefly. An attribute or ability is something that is simply, it's like this, flying. Plane cycling would be another one, Eternalize is another one, but these are like really niche. Flying, for example, basically indicates that the creature cannot be blocked, or the creature can only be blocked by other creatures with flying. So let's say we have Undead Augur out on my side and my opponent has Timeless Dragon. If Timeless Dragon's swinging into me for 5 damage, I can't block it because Undead Augur doesn't have flying himself. There are other spells, or there are other attributes like Hexproof, Ward, that basically say, oh, you can't target this creature. White's very good at giving those effects to its creatures to protect them. Because let's say someone wants to murder your creature, you can basically say, oh, well, actually... Well, you can just say, well, actually, Lazotep Chancellor has Hexproof. You can't target him. Opponents can't target my creature anymore. That is white in a nutshell. White is also known for what we call stacks. Stacks is interaction, but it's permanent-based interaction. So it's basically cards that are like, oh, I'm going to play this enchantment, and you can only cast a 1 spell per turn. Our next horror that I will talk about is black. Black is known for having a very good value, but it's always at a cost. So, for instance, black can draw a lot of cards, but you're going to have to lose a lot of life in the process. You're going to damage yourself, right? Or black is going to have effects that are say, oh, I'm going to draw a card. However, you have to kill a creature for it. Black also has a lot of effects that are simply saying, oh, destroy target creature. Like it's a lot of just sacrifice and self-harm to get greater gain and benefit from it. Black has decent removal in the sense that they are known for having good creature removal, like incredibly good creature removal, but they don't have great enchantment or artifact removal. That's pretty much black in a nutshell. The last color, and I actually think one of the more interesting ones, is red. Red is known for having great artifact removal, probably the best artifact removal in the game. They're kind of like green in that they don't have great creature removal. They just have spells that are like, oh, we're going to deal damage to target creature. So, for instance, if we have Lazotep Chancellor out, or a better example would be Timeless Dragon. Timeless Dragon is a 5/5. White, for instance, if you just cast Swords Depositories, we could exile this creature with no issue. However, if it's red, red's equivalent to Path to Exile would be something like Lightning Bolt, which is just a spell that does 3 damage to target. To any target. Lightning Bolt deals 3 damage to target creature or player. For 1 red mana, you can only deal 3 damage to Timeless Dragon, while with 1 white mana, you can completely get rid of that threat to begin with. So red struggles with enchantment. Red has like no enchantment removal. It struggles with enchantment removal and creature removal. It makes up for it in it has some of the best ramp in the game, but its ramp is not in the form of green ramp, where green ramp is very instant, it's burst. I forgot what I called it before. It's impulse ramp. Oh, so impulse ramp isn't even the right term. It's permanent based ramp. Oh, we search our library for a card, like another land, we put on the battlefield. It's ramp that persists each turn. Red is really good for having ramp that basically says, oh, we're going to cast this non-permanent spell, and we're going to get mana from it. So while green, you cast Nature's Lore, and let's say you cast this, and you put that card into the battlefield. You're at a 1 mana deficit that turn. Like, you spent 2 mana to cast it, but you only get 1 mana from return. Red is different in that red will have stuff like Pyretic Ritual, where, oh, we can spend 2 mana, but we get 3 mana from it. So we actually get more mana than what we put into it. We call that fast mana. Fast mana is very, very powerful in commander formats. I mean, fast mana can break or make the game for the most part. So Pyretic Ritual will allow us to gain like that extra mana, but only for 1 turn. And that can be very good or not so good, depending on your game plan and what your deck's goal is, right? Another thing that red is really known for is impulse draw. So while colors like black has good card draw, pretty much every color has great card draw other than green. Green kind of got the short end of the stick there. Red has something called impulse draw, which is just cast this spell, draw a few cards, and usually it's like, okay, you have to discard a card. There's always like a consequence to it. It's kind of like black in that sense where, oh, in order to cast this, you need to like hurt yourself. Well, red is kind of the same way where it's like, oh, well, you can draw cards, but either those cards are going to have some harm to you, you're not going to be able to keep them forever. Like a lot of the times a card will just say, oh, draw a card, but these cards are going to be in exile. I'll show you an example. If I remember the name correctly, I think it's just called Ren's Resolve. Yeah, exile the top 2 cards of your library, and to the end of your next turn, you can play them. So this card is essentially saying that, okay, so you can exile 2 cards, and you just put them to the side. You can play them until the end of not turn 1, but at the end of turn 2. After end 2, those cards are now in exile forever. Again, it's not bad, but depending on the deck, you really have to make it work, right? And that's why red is a very interesting color combination, because it is the aggro color. It does everything very, very fast, but not as well as other colors. It's like it does things incredibly quick, but for less gain in that sense, right? Less permanent gain. It's really interested in ending the game out as soon as possible. So this video is getting quite long, and I have briefly discussed how to play Magic the Gathering and the color combinations of commanders and their role in Magic in general. So I think this is a pretty good video just to briefly discuss Magic and how to play Magic the Gathering. Maybe I will produce a different video that goes into more depth into building a commander deck and like maybe specific archetypes. So like, what's the difference between blue and black and green and black? Like, how are those strategies going to differ? Nonetheless, I hope that this video has been informative, and I've really enjoyed making it. And I just hope that it's been informative for you, the audience. So thank you for watching, and hopefully you might hear from me again.